And Matt Young, it's a pleasure to be here tonight, and I appreciate the invite. Let me see, over the course of the last 30 years, I became more and more, just fell in love with Finches more and more. And, during that time period, I ended up working at the Lab of O for 15 years, worked on the Merlin project, did some of the editing of the files in some of those first packages of the Merlin project at the Lab of O for North America and Europe. I have a master's degree in ornithology from SUNY SF, which is the environmental branch of Syracuse University, and lots of other interests as well. I have 13 years working with special needs kids as well in social work, and have a big interest in native orchids and described a new species of orchids a few years ago. So let me just share my presentation here. Hopefully everybody can see that. So again, appreciate the invite, Denver, again. Crossbills, I'm here tonight to talk about Crossbills, the Finch Research Network, and the Stokes Guide to Finches of the United States and Canada. My story really, started in 1995. I finished my undergraduate degree at SUNY Oneonta, and my degree was in meteorology and hydrogeology, and I knew I wasn't actually going to go into that field when I finished my degree. The leading job in the field of hydrogeology at the time was something called LUST. It was the assessment of leaky underground storage tanks at abandoned gas stations. So, the end of that semester, I actually bought a pair of binoculars. I just started birding. I bought a car. I went to a Grateful Dead show in Albany, where I'm from. And the next day after the concert, I got up and started my drive towards Yellowstone, which in the photo there, you can see that's Lower Falls in Yellowstone. And my first day, I took about a week to get out there. And the first day at Yellowstone, I grabbed my binoculars, went to Lower Falls, and as I was there at Lower Falls, a flock of crossbills flew in above me and started feeding. And I just remember going, what an unbelievable adaptation, just looking at them feed above me. And, you don't know in these seminal moments in life at the time they happen, but my whole world just kind of shifted from there on. And that's kind of the power of birds. I'm a big believer in the power of birds on how they can impact people's lives. But I basically never looked back in my passion of studying finches. I'll give you some more of that here in a second. Now, what well, I just want to share a video here, and hopefully this plays okay, of basically what I witnessed when I first saw crossbills feeding. Now, this is going to be a video of white-winged crossbills footage that I found a flock near Ithaca, New York. I brought the crew out from the Lab of O when I was there, and we captured this footage and put the narration together.
Of the 10,000 bird species on Earth, only 5, all in the finch family, have crossed bills. The white-winged crossbill is found in the higher latitudes of North America, traveling from coast to coast in large flocks in search of white spruce trees. Females are greenish-yellow, males red, and both have 2 distinct white bars on the wings. Their unique crossed bill, with the lower mandible curving under the upper maxilla, is adapted to reach heavily protected seeds found under tough cone scales. To reach the seeds, a white-wing places the tip of the curved lower mandible against the cone while inserting the upper maxilla under the scale. Beak partially open, the bird uses the curved mandible as a lever, twisting his head as he pries up the scale. He eats the seed, discarding the husk. The curve of the mandible provides the leverage needed to force the scale up, enabling crossbills to feed on seeds that are not accessible to other species. A white-wing often twists the cone off and carries it to a perch where it holds the cone in one claw and rotates it like a corn cob. Lower mandibles cross either left or right, and each individual always holds the cone in the claw toward which their mandible curves. This ensures that the tip of the mandible is facing the cone, giving the bird the best leverage to quickly pluck the seeds. White-wings are remarkably efficient at harvesting their food. An individual bird can eat up to 3,000 seeds per day. Crossbills are able to swiftly bypass a conifer's armor as a direct result of their specialized beaks, an excellent example of evolutionary adaptation.
I never get sick of looking at that video, no matter how many times. So that was just a little insight to kind of what I witnessed on the red crossbills. Obviously, those were white-winged crossbills on the banks of lower Yellowstone River. And now here we are 20, almost 30 years later, actually. And I launched with a board of directors from across North America and also in Germany, the Finch Research Network. We launched it with the Finch Forecast 4 years ago, a little over 4 years ago. And in this presentation, I'm kind of going to give you a few of the main projects that the Finch Research Network is working on, and then also kind of take you through, the details of the backstory and the layout of the new book that Lillian Stokes and I just put out, The Finches of the United States and Canada. But a lot of people probably in this crowd, I've certainly interacted with a number of people over the last 15 plus years now from Colorado that and all throughout the West that have sent me recordings to analyze and do a spectrographic analysis, audio spectrographic analysis to give an idea of crossbill call types. And that's kind of pretty much where I think a lot of people got to know me over the last, particularly when I was at the Lab of O across those 15 years. Here's a quote from Jeff Groth. He was the one that first described the first 8 call types. An amazing complex, the red crossbill complex. It's how we presented it actually in the book too, was the red crossbill complex. And here are the spectrographs of the 12 different call types. We just described type 12 as the northeastern red crossbill. And with the flight call comes an implied ecological specialization. There's slight differences of bill, depth sizes that help, that make them better at foraging on different types of conifers in their core area that each of these types occur. But for this crowd, I've kind of tailored, it's always a little bit of a challenge, but I've tailored this presentation to be more Western focused. Obviously, it just makes sense to do more of a Western focused presentation for parts of, for Denver area. So learn the sounds and how to read a spectrograph. I just want to, and hopefully this plays okay. Let me know if it doesn't, but here's a running spectrograph of a crested ore pendula. Full speed. Hopefully everybody could hear that. I'm assuming if you didn't, you're going to let me know. Here it is at the half speed. And the reason why I'm showing these is it's like our brains don't really do a great job of processing sound in real time. So I'm using this species to kind of help all of us kind of understand sound and, kind of follow sound in, kind of real time as it's happening. And I'm going to slow it down here, and you really can kind of get that downward cascading sound at half speed. almost sounds like somebody taking their finger over a comb, in my opinion. Now, when it comes to crossbills, um, there's a few different trains of thought on how crossbills kind of, you know, go about their business throughout the cone cycle year. And what I mean by the cone cycle year, typically, you know, cone crops are starting to form in May and June, and then they start to ripen in July, June, July, August. They start to ripen, and crossbills start to move around at the end of that cone cycle year, May and June, and they're starting to look for these newly developing cone crops. A lot of times, you read the literature, and a lot of times it mentions how they kind of breed all throughout the year, but we don't really believe that they breed that much throughout the year. They really mainly breed in two cycles, July to October, and then January to April. April. And from a crossbill perspective, it's all about what is on the menu at any one given time throughout that cone cycle year of July through June. They generally are going to start out red crossbills feeding on the soft cone conifers, hemlock, spruces, larches in that summer nesting event. And then they're going to look for the last remaining spruce crops and hemlock crops, and then switch to the hard pines, which the big ones out west are ponderosa pine, a lodgepole. The ones here, and there's a lot of other ones out west too, Jeffrey pine and areas. And here in the east, it's red, jack, and pitch pine in the Northeast that are the big players. So in the book, and we'll get into this a bit more detail later, um, I used some slides from the book as part of this crossbill project that the Finch Research Network is working on. And we're always trying to get an idea on different distributions of where these crossbill call types are hanging out. Now, there's also another scientist, a lot of you probably know, Dr. Craig Menkman, who's done an unbelievable amount of incredible work on the whole crossbill complex, particularly throughout the Mountain West. And, you know, he, it, I think it was like the late 1990s, he asked himself the question, is there a area of lodgepole pine east of the Rockies that has an absence of tree squirrels? And the reason why I'm getting into this, in this book that I just put out, I did these foraging charts. They're mainly meant as a guide to finding crossbills. They're not absolutes on how to find the call types, but they're a roadmap on how to find the call types and how they switch from conifer to conifer throughout the year. Now, when he asked himself this question, is there a local variant of lodgepole pine east of the Rocky Mountains? He ended up finding an area, the South Hills in Idaho, not too far from a lot of people in this audience. And in that area, there were no tree squirrels. And he started recording the call types, and it sounded very, very different. And then he did a mark recapture study over decades now, finding out that this particular call type, type 9, which has been elevated to species status about 6-7 years ago, was elevated to cache or crossbill status, species status. Now, this is a bird that is super specialized, obviously. This is a bird that is feeding on a local variant of lodgepole pine in a fairly isolated area. Now, there are type 2s and 5s that come in out of that area, which is those are the two most common call types across the Intermountain interior West is type 2 and 5. And what he found is, they basically, catch a crossbill, type 9s were assortatively mating more than 99% of the time with the correct call type. This is a bird that's very, very, from a key conifer perspective, which is a major, kind of theory or a proposal of what Craig has put forward and how these birds have adaptively radiated and kind of specialized throughout the Mountain West. It feeds on this local variant of lodgepole pine. And you can see in the foraging chart there, it's a pretty select diet. Whereas type 2, which is, it's most adapted for refeeding on ponderosa pine in the West, it also is a bird that has an incredibly eclectic diet. It is found You know, it is most common out west, but can be found in just about any area of North America except for, you know, really the very, very southeastern area of the country. And it is, you know, here in the east, we see it feeding on all kinds of different conifers. I know in like the Sierra Nevada area, it feeds on a variety of or a subspecies of lodgepole pine, even though it is listed as a ponderosa pine specialist. So, like I said, this is a bird that is basically a nomad. It wanders across the country. It kind of has a different strategy than the Cassia crossbill that is relatively, you know, basically resident. And then recently we described type 12, which to most of us looking at type 12 or crossbill call types in the East, it doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense for a crossbill in the East to be super specialized on any kind of one species of conifer. You know, they're going to only kind of last if they're constantly conifer switching in a fairly, you know, area. And like I said, we just described this bird. It loves red spruce in the beginning of the cone cycle year. And as you go through the year, it eventually kind of starts to switch to those hard pines as well, the red pine, jack pine, and pitch pine. And you know what I'm showing here in these charts, the green is when they breed. Basically, the black is not when they're breeding much. So, you know, I'm just kind of giving a relative abundance of throughout the year what they use and what they switch to throughout the year. So I'm going to play some of these now. I'm going to get into some of these. So type 9, you know, again, super specialized on a local variant of uh, of lodgepole pine, South Hills area, one county, Cassia County. The interesting thing is with this backstory on this bird is about 40% of the range burned about 4 years ago. And it, you know, a lot of this has kind of been in the news, particularly in Colorado. Christian Noons, I think it is, and also Nathan Peplow, you know, wrote some articles and also did some recordings of birds that ended up being ID'd as Cassia crossbills in Colorado. And they were even breeding in Colorado. But since then, they've even been also reported in Wyoming and California as well. And here's hopefully this plays. Has a very dry kind of sound to it, but a bit polyphonic in that there's kind of two elements of the call that overlap a bit. Now, type 5 is also a lodgepole pine specialist. Um, Also, kind of is much more specialized than we believe than the Finch Research Network than a lot of the other crossbill call types. So, type 9 and type 5, or Cassia crossbill and type 5, are the two that are probably the most specialized of all the call types. And you can see in the map, that's a map that also is unique to the book, not really seen or updated. As you can see, this bird is vagrant in the east at best. And here is what type 5 sounds like. Uses also a lot of spruce, kind of twangy sounding. Now, type 2, here's the map, and you can see this bird basically can be found almost, you know, anywhere across North America except for the extreme southeast. Um, Very eclectic in diet. It's a nomad. Um, you know, ponderosa pine isn't the most reliable producer of a cone crop from year to year. I'm going to play two different call types of this one, two different variants within the call type. One that is much more common out west, which is this kind of pinked type 2, which kind of goes down, up, back down. Oh, that's the unkinked one. I have it backwards, sorry. And this is the one we actually kind of here more in the east a lot of times. But it's found in the west too. Here's the one that is in the west, and it's the king type too. So yeah, I jumped right into the weeds coming out of the gate here, figuring a lot of crossbill interest across the Intermountain West. And then type 4 is also a nomad type. It's, key conifers, Douglas fir, but we've found it this past year. We had three different call types, two type 2, 4, and our northeastern type 12. And the type 2 that we had here in the northeast this past year, the type 2s and type 4s made this big movement from west to east across the country last July, basically, of 2023. And they spent like 9 months, 8 months in a incredible white pine cone crop that we had. And all three types were found to be nesting successfully using just the white pine. Now they did switch to Hopkins pine and jack pine and red pine towards the end of the cone cycle year, which is when food is most limited, is kind of late winter, spring to a crossbill. It sounds quite a bit different in my opinion. I know I've listened to far too many crossbills compared to most people, but it's kind of a plick plick. It's kind of a, I call it kind of the happy crossbill. I mean, they're all kind of happy, but kind of a different sound, not descending. 12 here, northeastern crossbill. And it's an up down, and you can see the map there. It's in a fairly range restricted area. Oh, let me go back there. Yep. Uses all kinds of species basically, though. I mean, I've seen it breeding in spruces, hemlock, even our eastern tamarack. I see it in. Now, the second project that the Finch Research Network is really working on is this Evening Grosbeak Road to Recovery project. Continental conservation for evening grosbeaks. There's multiple partners, as you can see here. It's Carnegie Museum of Natural History, Powder Mill, Finch Research Network, which I'm the founder and president of, and then the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy and the Natural Heritage Program. All of us have been working on this. It was started the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy in 2017. And so, yeah, evening grosbeaks, 92% decline since 1970. And here's a eBird data map on trends, breeding trends that you can see. In the red is where all the declines are. The blue dots there are where some of the increases are. And so in 2021, we were approached by various partners, partners, and just kind of spun out of Partners in Flight, the whole Road to Recovery project, and they basically designated 4 species as Road to Recovery birds, and the evening grosbeak was one of them, and we secured a big grant, and so we've been working on putting satellite tags on them, nano tags on them, and also a banding project. But a lot of people don't realize there's actually a call type phenomenon in the grosbeaks as well. Um, Here in the East with this project, we've been really focused on, we only get type 3 here in the East. Type 1 is the one that wanders throughout the West. Type 4, which I should have slid that one in there. That's my bad. I should have slid type 4. Type 4 is the one that is most common in your area in Colorado, actually. But type 1 is the most eruptive throughout the West. So you do get this one. in Colorado. And I believe Nathan reached out to me and said there were quite a few around last winter. So pure tone whistle, quite a bit different sounding, in my opinion, than the others. And then type 3 is our eruptive one throughout the east, the one that we actually do the winter finch forecast about, including other finches. It's similar in sound to type 4, but not the same. So it's kind of a ringing, but type 4 is kind of an attenuated version of this, I would say, which is the one you would hear in Colorado the most. So evening grosbeak, as you can see, there's the maps. Type 4 is the one that's most common in Colorado. Type 1 can be literally found from Alaska in the wintertime, from Alaska all the way down to almost the Mexico border. Um, in the book, we used pile for subspecies, but for this particular species, we actually use the Grinnell 1917 because the call types actually overlap pretty well with the outline of the subspecies from Grinnell in 1917. So this road to recovery, what is road recovery? It's basically that we developed a working group focused on evening grosbeak conservation. We've been trying to study evening grosbeaks across the full annual cycle, across the continental range, determining limiting factors. Multiple phases in this, 2, 3 years now. So we're in phase 1 still, pretty much. We're kind of in the between phase 1 and phase 2. So assessing and learning. But like a group like the golden wing warbler's been around for like 20 years, and they're later in this process. So right now we have more than 60 members from across the United States and Canada. We have multiple priority team groups focused on various subjects on trying to learn what has led to the decline. So we're looking at diet, we're looking at direct mortalities. They're susceptible to window kills at backyard feeders. They're susceptible also to going the road for gritting salt and getting hit by cars, unfortunately. And then we have this migratory connectivity project, and that's where we're banding and putting satellite tags and also nano tags on birds. And then we're looking at habitat. And of course, climate change plays a role in any of these kind of more coniferous breeding birds. So outreach and communication has kind of been the main thing that the Finch Research Network has been involved in. I do a lot of the planning of where we're going to go next to maybe, band or tag these birds. And when we go to places, I'm the one that often will do a presentation on the project. I held a coffee house chat at Saxon Bog in Minnesota. We have a feeder cam in Maine that has been great for evening grosbeaks. And I've done a number of presentations, as you can see. I think it's been more than 25 groups across 12 states. Possible factors in the evening grosbeak decline. We know it's a spruce budworm bird. So spruce budworm is a natural cyclical, cycling, insect caterpillar. And the evening grosbeaks love spruce budworm, like a lot of our spruce budworm warblers. You might have heard Cape Mays and Bay Breast. Also, the populations tend to go up and down with budworm outbreaks. Particularly across the boreal, but also in the montane west. It's almost equal distribution of evening grosbeak between what's found in the United States and what's found in the boreal forest. I think it's like 52% of the population's found in the boreal and 48% is found in the United States, which a majority of that is across the mountain west. As also mycoplasma, we have also seen in evening grosbeak, like house finch, they can get conjunctivitis as well. And so here is kind of a look at our field operations. We use bow nets. Obviously, we would never trigger the bow net with that many birds in the bow net. And then we have this kind of Eskimo igloo tent that is used as a pop-up field station. And then they put these tags on the birds. And since the beginning of the project, which really started in Pennsylvania in 2017, we now have 453 color banded birds, 160 radio tag birds, 66 satellite tag birds, and one GPS tag bird. Um, when we talk about satellite tags versus radio tags or nano tags. Nano tags are basically Modus tower detections. So in the east, there's been a lot of these towers put up. Bird gets a tag put on it, not a satellite tag, but a radio tag or a nano tag on it. And when it flies over those towers, it then sends a reading to us. And so we've now had 41 linkages or 41 birds where we've had linkages to where they've moved to from Pennsylvania, Maine, and New York on just Modus tags. Now they won't let us, notice birds or the nano tags on birds here in the Northeast, but they won't really let us put them on birds in Minnesota or across the much of the Western United States yet, because there's just not enough of these towers yet. Here are some of the select tracks for evening grosbeaks. These are individual birds that we've actually, tagged in certain spots with the satellite tag, which we're getting readings on them all the time. As long as they have enough power from the sun, they're giving us readings. And it's a much more, you get a lot more return, but they're also a lot more expensive than the nano tags. These are individual tracks of birds that we've tagged. Pretty cool. You can see this one bird that basically went from, eastern Quebec all the way over to Minnesota and Saxon, crossed the lake in one morning, which we didn't really think they went across lakes, but we do believe this bird went across the lake the long way, actually. So pretty fascinating. We did take the project for the first time ever out west just recently. Well, last spring, it was the first time we actually went out west and we tagged birds, satellite tagged birds just east of Salt Lake City. Um, and that was two populations. That was type 1 and type 4s. We had more type 1s, believe it or not, than type 4s. This again was I think it was late March we were there. And we actually found a bit of a range extension or expansion for type 1. We didn't think that they actually would stick around Utah. The thought is type 1s probably retreat back more to the Pacific Northwest. But a couple of the birds hung around in Utah and, seemed to try to attempt a nest in Utah. So a bit of a range. This is why, or one of the many reasons why we're tagging these birds. We're trying to get an idea of how these populations interact. So here's a really cool map for the Midwest and Northeast, Modus and satellite tags combined. So we're trying to get this, full annual connectivity between, the wintering grounds and the breeding grounds. We've only been banding and tagging birds on the wintering grounds. It's just a lot easier to get find evening grosbeaks and actually put tags on birds. We have pretty strong migratory connectivity here in the east, stronger than what we've found in the Midwest so far. And that area in orange and red, that is the spruce budworm outbreak. That is a map. So we basically have a lot of these birds that are being tagged in New York and Pennsylvania and even Maine. And that one bird in even Minnesota have been going back to these hot spots in the spruce budworm outbreaks. So pretty fascinating to kind of see the movement of these birds. Evening grosbeaks, big, interesting history in the eastern U.S. They weren't really found in the east or thought to be much in the east until mid to late 1800s. A lot of people claim, like the planting of box elder and this baited highway, where they love to feed on box elder seeds, which is a maple. And it was basically by 1965 they had been found or confirmed to be breeding in all of the northeastern states, pretty much. Even Pennsylvania, they bred once, and the Maritimes. Now, what drives these, eruptions or movements of these finches? This is kind of a segue into the third big thing that the Finch Research Network is really interested in. It's interested in, crossbill, distribution of the call types, also foraging of the call types. Then this evening, Grosbeak Road to Recovery Project, which I'm a co-lead of, and then there's this winter finch forecast, which is definitely more really just eastern United States. But there's always an interest to try to see what you can maybe do on a winter finch forecast, even in the West. It's a different kind of situation out west, obviously, because of the topography. It's much more of an altitudinal thing than a latitudinal thing. But big drivers of finch eruptions here in the east. Conifer seed is a big driver of it. Deciduous seed, particularly birches and alder for redpolls. And then fruit for pine grosbeaks. They love mountain ash and a lot of different fruiting trees. And of course, the crossbills are the most keyed into the conifer cone. But the other finches, the other finches also are driven to erupt out of an area. Now, what is an eruption? The thought is, and I'll get to this in the next couple slides. I should have probably flipped this, but basically the thought is on what is an eruption is, all right, so we all have this we have our backyard garden variety finches, but there's a lot of these finches that are in the boreal, when they have a good reproductive success year after year, and then and then at some point the food crop crashes, it can't support that population, that higher population that's been successful for a couple of years. So then a portion of the population needs to erupt down into the United States. Now, again, this is more geared towards the eastern part of the United States. We put this winter finch forecast out. It was started by Ron Pittaway in the 90s, and it has grown to become one of the more popular ornithological articles that come out every fall. Now, right at the beginning of the pandemic, pretty much in 2020, we had this incredible super flight of all of the 8 eastern eruptive finches moving southward into the southern area of their eruption zone. What caused this? It was basically a perfect storm of sorts. It was a generational cone crop and spruces in the east and in the boreal. It was, well, actually, yeah, in the boreal, it was this burgeoning kind of spruce budworm outbreak that had been going on now. Now it's been going on for about 10, 11, 12 years. At that time, it was only about. And spruce and finch eruptions tend to also follow natural cyclical natures of kind of a biennial, every other year kind of eruptive pattern as well. Probably tied though to how tree species also produce good crops one year and then poor crops the next year. Obviously, in the east versus the west, like I said, the west is a bit of a harder thing to predict because of the altitude and with the topography. Like I said, the winter finch forecast started by Ron Pittaway. It was actually started even before 1999, but it became more known and took on this format online in 1999. Focuses on the eastern northeast, Ontario, the Maritimes. Is now done by Tyler Orr, who is a Finch Research Network board member. So I work closely with Tyler putting that out. And so we have almost words of 100 people. It's kind of hard to see it on this, but there's these dots, and we send out. Tyler sends this form out every year. Says, "Hey, what is the forecast on, or what is the trees? The crops looking like on these 15 tree species in your area?" And then we collect this from. Basically, we have people reporting to us from coast to coast in Canada and along many of the northern tier states in the United States. And then we make a prediction. like what finches are going to come south that year. And so what you're seeing here, and hopefully these work, you're going to see these maps move. These are eBird maps, not the bubble maps. These are a little more expanded view, wider view. The deeper purples are where the highest densities are for that bird. This is basically how these eruptions or these movements of this population or this particular species over the last 5 years. So from 2019, 2020 through 23, 24. Now, purple finch, there's two different subspecies. There's an eastern and a western, and I'll get to that soon. But you can see here in 2019, 2020, we'll go through this again here. There was not much of an eruption. 2020, 21, huge big movements in the south, right there. In fact, I wonder if I can pause this. I don't think I can. I got to work on figuring out how to pause that. But again, if you look at this, you're going to see the deeper purples are when they've moved into the southern states. So they kind of, not much of a movement in 2019, big one in the super flight, not much then again, then a bigger one in 23, and then not much last year again. And here is Siskin. I'm only going to do a few of these. Again, huge movement, and you're going to see a theme here, 2020, 2021 in that super flight year. Just look at the deeper purples across the southern United States. That was the year there was unfortunately a salmonella outbreak with pine siskins. There was an article written in Audubon in October of that year that siskins had taken over the country. They were everywhere. In fact, in the east, in the northeast, there was a 2-week window period, late September and October, where they were actually migrating at night, which they are not known to be. Finches, generally speaking, aren't much of a night migrant. They're more diurnal. Here's red pole, same thing. A little harder to see, but you can see out west, it's almost a little more dramatic. Not that you really ever get huge eruptions of red poles, but you do some years. But you can see some years there are really hardly any out west. And then some years they kind of make a push down into Colorado a little bit more. And then evening grosbeak, pretty dramatic. There's actually records in that super flight year again, 2020, 21. There was a record in Florida. That was the first time since the 80s they had reported in Florida. And this one really shows that biennial pattern of eruptions. It's like one year it pushes into the south, next year not much. Then it pushes again, next year not much. So, and then red crossbill, which is kind of interesting. It's not as much of a biennial eruptive because it's so kind of tied to conifer seed. But you can see in 23, 24, 2023, 24, the last map in this series, kind of a filling in of from west to east of purples, where there were records of type 2s and 4s that were basically migrating from the western United States to the eastern United States. It was the best type 4 eruption that we ever had in the Northeast in the 20 plus years I've been following it. So this is the other big thing that we, been, and again, it's crossbill distribution and foraging, it's evening grosbeak conservation and putting tags on these birds. It's the winter finch forecast that we put out every year, again, primarily for the eastern United States. But, backstory on the book, the amazing story is Lillian Stokes in August of 2020 had a flock of red crossbills coming down to a local conservation center, Harris Center in New Hampshire. The executive director called her up and said, Lillian, hey, we're getting crossbills, which, again, crossbills aren't as nearly as common as they are out west. They're kind of a part of, almost your daily life out west, but they aren't as common here in the east, but they have become quite a bit more common than they were, I'd say, 20, 30 years ago. But anyway, this flock started landing beginning of the pandemic. Don, unfortunately, everybody knows Lillian is writing all these, Stokes field guides with Don. Don is unfortunately in a memory care facility, um, and is, he's doing okay, but it's an unfortunate situation. But these birds started landing in New Hampshire at this nature center, conservation center. Executive director called her up. She ran down there. She started recording the birds. She started to photograph the birds. And then somebody said, "Hey, you need to send them to the Matt at Cornell." Well, she ended up sending them to a buddy of mine, a different Matt, who then ended up telling her, send these to Matt Young. And this was the genesis of the book. Literally, Lillian, when we give this presentation together, she always says the Crossbills recruited her, the Finches recruited her. So this is the book that just came out about six weeks ago. I'm going to kind of give you a kind of a layout, a run through of the layout of the book. I'm losing my voice a little bit here since it's late, but so you have a backstory, which I just gave you. The book is laid out where we cover the main breeding finches. There's 17 main breeding finches. There's a chapter on finch eruptions, which I talked to about just now a little bit. And then there's also we cover vagrant finches, finches of Hawaii. A lot of people don't realize the honey creepers in Hawaii are actually finches of Hawaii. Feeding and attracting finches. The great thing about finches is they are accessible because most people have backyard finches, but then they're also mysterious in that there's these other birds that a lot of us don't see that often. There's also a research and conservation section in the book too, and we kind of end with how you can help. So the main breeding finches, and I've kind of geared this towards the West, the amazing Rosy Finch complex. There's kind of two groups within the gray crown Rosy Finch. There's, the Cloudlands Finch, we call it in the book. A lot of them breed at the top of these mountains at 10, 11, 12, 14,000 feet. But then there's a subspecies, Gricia nucha, that actually breeds in Alaska on Adak Island in the Aleutians, and they're actually quieter looking birds, and they're breeding at sea level. For nesting in abandoned buildings. So in the book, we kind of do these deep into the science, but we also try to provide narratives that kind of like for the beginning or novice birder because of finches being so accessible in backyards. The black rosy finch and the brown cap rosy finch listed, endangered. Almost the whole population of brown caps exist in your state. In 2021, the Finch Research Network became part of the Rosy Finch Working Group as well. Purple finch, a lot of people, like I mentioned a little while ago, we don't believe there's call types in all the finches by any means, but there are quite a bit. There is a pretty noticeable difference between type 1 and type 2, or what is the western and the eastern subspecies of purple finches. There's the spectrograph of the two. There's kind of new science that we presented in the book. Also have a small paper coming out on this pretty soon as well. Cassin's finch, very common for a lot of people out west. When we did the deep dives, again, it breeds pretty high elevation. They have song dialects. Both sexes sing Cassin's finches. In fact, that's not that uncommon with finches. And the other interesting thing is, they are also mimics. A lot of the finches will imitate other birds, but not all of the finches do that. So that's a research topic that we kind of touch upon in the book as well. Uh, House finches, here again in the east, filling in these kind of what we're calling quick takes, creative essays at the beginning of each species that we cover, at least the main breeding species that we cover, to kind of give a narrative to get people kind of know the personality or the backstory of each of the Finch to kind of make an interesting read. We all know that a lot of guides can be pretty dry, and we really wanted to kind of give this book a little bit more kind of interest as far as like just reading it from a historical perspective. The amazing thing here in the East, again, house finches weren't native here to the East. There was a pet store in Long Island in the 1940s. Some people saw some flocks of house finches flying around at the same time. They eventually tracked it down to the store. The feds were about to basically, come in and, shut it down. And the person got wind of it, released the birds. And then you had this amazing kind of, story where the population of the eastern house finch meets the western house finch. Again, some of the tidbits in the book that we kind of do deep dives. We did a literature search. Sex ratio, a lot more males in most of the finches, really. The color comes from a dietary carotenoids that the males eat. So the redder is the better that the female sees more fitness. They're just better genetic quality, better providers. Lesser goldfinch, again, another. There's a lot of common finches that still need a lot of research. Lesser goldfinch is one of the least studied species out there, and really needs a lot of. You have these two color morphs, two different subspecies. They seem to kind of behave a bit differently. The green breeds, the greenbacks, which are the more northern, don't seem to be, or the more northern one is more migratory than the southern one. Um, there's just a lot of research that could be done on this species. A beautiful bird. Um, Lillian also did this kind of quirky, quick take on Lawrence's goldfinch, where she actually interviews kind of a mock Mr. Lawrence. This was before the whole renaming of bird names that were named after people. So it was kind of interesting that she thought of doing this even before we really even had wind of what was going on. The fascinating thing is Casson named Lawrence's after Lawrence, um, and Lawrence goldfinch and Casson's finch are the only two of the finches that will actually change name. American goldfinch, we put it prominently front and center on the guide. It's probably the one that most people have probably the most experience with. The interesting tidbits that we found when we did a deep dive into the research, it's the only one. A lot of people will say, hey, where'd all my goldfinches go in the wintertime? A lot of people don't realize they molt to look quite a bit different in the wintertime. It's the only one of the finches that really molts to look that different. Um, also gets the carotenoid pigments from eating what in its diet. Female chooses the brightest males. Bill color is a status signal and settles disputes among the females. And why does it molt into this other plumage? Well, when you do the deep dive into research, the winter plumage has more insulation, so it makes sense. Vagrant finches we do cover as well. There's only a couple handfuls of vagrant finches, and so Lillian wrote this wrong place at the wrong time and has the potential to send birders into mega rarity delirium. There's a code system for vagrants. 3 is rare, 4 is casual, 5 is 3 is rare and annual, 4 is casual, not annual, 5 is mega rarity. Ramblings of 3, they've actually nested on Alaska on Attu. Actually, just a beautiful bird, widespread across Europe, many recordings in the United States. Hawfinch is another one that, fair number of records, it's a 4, so Brambling's more common. There was this amazing story of a container ship in 2016 going from China to California, and the people on the boat were keeping this little mini mixed flock together of a hawfinch a brambling and a rustic farming. And we kind of cover that in the book a little bit. Then Palace's Rose Finch. It's a little bit of an ode to a good friend and a birder that we all lost, Tom Johnson. This is his photograph of the one bird that's been ever recorded in the ABA area, and that was also in Alaska. So this is a 5. It's the rarest of rare. Now, feeding and attracting finches. I know I'm getting pretty close here. I'm at 53 minutes, it looks like. Um, it's a big, it's really, really important to Lily and I. The Stokes really kind of popularized that whole backyard feeding in their guides. And also, Lillian was a psychiatric social worker before she became Lillian Stokes extraordinaire, you know, author of 35 guides. I was a social worker for 13 years. I'm a big, big believer in the wellness aspect of bird watching. And so Lillian wrote this little poem: look, flashing gold and black, see wings descending, watch flocking seed seekers, hear chirping sleigh bells, notice evening grosbeaks feeding, realize you forgot to worry about anything. I think a lot of us, this is kind of, I think scientists really need to talk about the why from a observational beauty perspective of why they love to look at birds and watch birds and study birds. I think the more we care about birds, the better world we'll have in a lot of ways. And there's this study and after study that's coming out about the improved mental well-being for people that are both healthy and have, suffer from depression, on how birds can kind of relieve people and help them lead, lives that are less stress, less anxiety, less depression. uh, Obviously, the beauty of finches is they're, again, a common backyard component in many of our lives that love watching birds. You kind of need the right feeder with the right seed to attract certain finches. So we cover this in a chapter in the book. Finch safety, super important. Make sure you clean the feeders. As I mentioned earlier, salmonella was a big issue with pine siskins in that superflight year. Obviously, house finch disease or conjunctivitis has kind of taken it on the particularly eastern house finches. Trichomoniasis has also been a bird that's been associated with purple finch declines, particularly in the Maritimes. And then gardening. This was Lillian's backyard in New Hampshire. Gardening, creating a natural landscape is super, super great to do for finches. So research and conservation, I've kind of already talked about. Evening Grosbeak Project. Obviously it's a watch list bird. It's a special concern, depending on what list you're looking at. Um, but also we cover in the book Hawaiian honey creepers, both in a chapter on the species, but we also cover it in the research and conservation section. Um, Lillian writes, the beating wings onward and onward to strive and search and reach through millennia, dreaming of paradise awaiting them, going beyond the known limits of flight, arriving, achieving radiation, forms changing, becoming new bird species, paradise found but eventually lost. And then she writes, but is it all lost? So we really wanted to cover the honey creepers because of the conservation crisis going on in Hawaii. They are fringillidae finches. Um, the thought is, somewhere between about 5 and 7 million years ago, a flock or maybe multiple different events occurred of Eurasian rose finches landed in Hawaii, and adaptively radiated out to 50 plus species of finches. And some of them evolved to have bills that look nothing like what many of us grew up thinking a finch was, a bird with a conical bill used for cracking seeds. I mean, that bird at the top there, the Evie, is a nectivorous species. The Palila in the middle, the yellow one, is really about the only inch left on Hawaii. There's only 15 now. Kind of actually looks like what many of us, see a finch being, or looking like a finch. So Kakiki, it's unfortunately now extinct. We just lost the last one, or we believe we lost the last one in the wild. There are some in captivity, so it is basically functionally extinct at this point. The main issue, and Hawaii's had a lot of issues from rats to snakes to feral pigs to change of habitat, uh, is over the last 100+ years is a house mosquito, a Culex mosquito that when it bites the honey creepers, it gives them an avian malaria, and they have no defense to it, and it basically kills the birds. Palila, also very critically endangered. It's a Mamani specialist. It's the one again that looks most like a finch, kind of related to bullfinches in Europe, pine grosbeaks here in Canada, or in the United States. EEV, vulnerable, but doing okay compared to the others. Nectar's on the Ohia and the Mamani. It's culturally a super important bird to the natives. The Akia pola owl, which is just an absolutely amazing adaptation, as basically those two bills, the upper and the lower mandible, they function to kind of, you know, act independently, but also kind of together. The lower bill taps like a woodpecker, finds where, the insects are, the larvae are in the tree, and then the upper bill kind of scoops them out. It's just an amazing adaptation. Again, not many of these birds left. The Hawaii amakihi is the only one that is resistant to the avian malaria. It carries it. It just doesn't seem to be lethal. But there is some hope, and that's why we really wanted to cover, this group in this book. Uh, is that there is, um, a birds not mosquito multi-agency partnership initiative that is being led by the American Bird Conservancy. There are mosquitoes that basically what the program is a mosquito birth control. They're inoculating or introducing male mosquitoes that have been given an incompatible Wolbachia bacteria. Many of the mosquitoes around the world kind of carry different types of Wolbachia bacteria, and if they're compatible, they successfully breed. Well, what they're trying to do here with this mosquito birth control is to, introduce the males that have been given an incompatible form of the Wolbachia bacteria. And when they release them back into the wild and mate with the females lay infertile eggs. And hopefully the populations can be managed down to next to zero, and the birds will have a chance to rebound. So, this is a project like the Evening Grosbeak Project. It's going to need continuous support and funding to try to get a handle on what's going on with these finches that are in decline. And we cover this in the book. Also, some of the last kind of miscellaneous loose end cross or finch related research questions. Vocalizations obviously super important in this group. House finch, goldfinch don't mimic, but Cassin's finch, purple finch, siskin, they all mimic. Why is that? Why is there a skewed sex ratio? There's so many more males. Also, female song. A lot of them sing. It's a interesting research area of researching which ones sing and how much. How many females sing, and then what also drives eruptions, and then how you can help. When we launched the Finch Research Network over 4 years ago now, we wanted everybody to be part of it, and that's why we called it the Finch Research Network. Everybody's kind of welcome, and there's a big citizen science component with finches in that, the recordings of, crossbills and grosbeaks than in the Macaulay Library. It's super helpful. The most common species in the Macaulay Library of Natural Sounds is by far the Crossbill, has over 30,000 recordings. The next closest is Carolina Wren, around 20,000. We also have some iNaturalist projects. Become a Finch forecaster. Um, that's part of the Winter Finch Forecast project that I talked about. We also have a couple foraging projects around evening grosbeak and red crossbill. And I always say to people, I always leave them with, if you take care of your finches in your backyard, wellness for finches is wellness for you. We do have some shirts that we sell on the website too at finchnetwork.org, Grosbeaks in Motion shirt, and then also that Finch forecast shirt. And with that, uh, that is all I really have. We're a nonprofit. We're dedicated. We have a board of directors from across the country. We have a Tom Hahn at UC Davis. We have Jamie Cornelius at Oregon State. We have Ian Cruikshank in British Columbia. We have Patrick Franca in Germany, me here in New York, Tyler Orr in Ontario, Tim Spar in Massachusetts. And if I'm forgetting anybody, Holger Klink here in Ithaca is at Cornell. That basically is, we're all just dedicated to our mission to study and hopefully preserve finches for the future. We also have, a lot of following on finches, eruptions, and mass crops, and I'm sure there's some in this group that are on that. And then, I leave you with, the book and this presentation would not be nearly as beautiful if it wasn't for the many contributing photographers. And thanks. With that, take any questions.
All right, I'm gonna start my video too. So we do have one question, and it may be that when you talked about Cassin's finch imitating other finches, that may answer this. I don't know, but this is from Lori. She said while she was hiking north of Crested Butte, she heard and saw a red bird that she was able to record with Merlin. She thought it was a crossbill, but Merlin ID'd it as a cassia. eBird flagged it. Consultation was done with the recording being reviewed. And the question was about the type of call, an excitement call in contrast to a flight call. The bird was perched on top of a conifer while the recording was being done. So what do you think? Any
So
thoughts
what was
on
I
that?
missed? You blipped out just a little bit in the very beginning. What was the very first sentence or two that you said?
This Lori Morton was hiking in north of Crested Butte, Colorado, which is in the Intermountain area,
Mhm.
and saw a red bird and was able to record it singing using Merlin.
And it identified it as a cash or crossbill.
Yeah.
Well, was it an excitement call or was it a flight call? Do we
I think
know?
she's asking what's the difference between
What's
an
the
excitement
difference
call?
between?
Yeah.
All right, so the deal is, with flight calls, there's this implied ecological specialization. And that's how these call types have been mainly described since Groth started. Now, excitement calls can be helpful, and the excitement calls are probably only given in the grand scheme of vocalizations by crossbills maybe 5% of the time, if that, maybe a little bit more than that during the breeding season. They generally only give it when there is a threat in the area or when there's breeding taking place between the male and the female. Or I have also heard it given in the context of, you have a crossbill call type in a given area. And when there's an interloper, like a different call type that is not typically found in that area, the more resident one, as a crossbill can be called resident, is the one that will sometimes give an excitement call. And I think it's just like, hey, we know you're here kind of thing. And it's a slightly agitated call. When it gets super agitated, it's more almost like an alarm call.
Mm.
When it's just like lightly kind of agitated, it's an excitement call. And that is the difference. They're very different on the spectrograph as well.
Uh,
So hopefully that helps.
Great, thanks. And I had a question when you were talking about the Modus Tower network not being very developed in the West. Do you feel
Mhm.
that that's an important direction? We had a great presentation by Nathan Peplow about the Modus Towers and the whole network and being built. So how do you feel that is in importance relative to other things?
Well, it's certainly an important tool. I mean, we all know, or many of us know, there's not great return a lot of times on banding of birds. I think banding of birds a lot of times the power with banding is learning molt limits and plumage differences and things like that. But you don't often get like a return on birds that are banded.
Mhm.
Modus towers increase that because, as the birds are flying around, they go over these, towers and you get a position on them. And I think when you're trying to get full annual cycle connectivity, for these species, you have a conservation concern. I think the more you can put the puzzle together, the more that you can learn about them and hopefully do something about saving them. Now, obviously, there's kind of a scale here from banding to Modus Tower, then to satellite, you know, um, satellite tags where you don't need a bird flying over a specific tower. Now, I think, and I hear this all the time, I look forward to, nobody loves a ton of towers. I get that in some ways. But these are not like these big, huge towers a lot of times. Some of them are, but some of them aren't all that tall, really. I think the more, I know the Modus network is increasing out west. There certainly is a push, and I completely, I can hear Nathan, if he's not in this crowd tonight, I could hear him in that presentation talking about towers and the importance of building the network across the West. It would make, it, it would be really great if we could put both Modus, the nano tags and the satellite tags wherever we go, but they just won't let us do it. And it makes sense. Why would you put a bird through having a tag on it if you're not going to get any readings? So there is a certain density of Modus towers that you need. So but I do hope it increases. But I do
Mhm.
think it's a valuable tool. These are all different. At the end of the day, they're different conservation tools, really.
Mhm.
Um, and I think there's power in that. The more Modus towers we can have, the more we can get ideas on where these birds are moving around, and so on and so
Right.
forth. And it's just going to help inform our decisions moving
Mhm.
forward. So,
Right. We have one more question
sure.
from Joe about the red crossbill feeding charts. He's a
Yes.
huge fan of the book, by the way, and has been obsessed with it since it came out. So that's a great testimonial. Um,
Yes.
in theory, let's say Engelmann spruce crops are down. Would that
Mhm.
bump up the switch to pines earlier in the season? So he's asking from a Colorado montane coniferous forest perspective. He's been hitting the spruce forest near him hard and haven't had much success. So is just wondering if they've already moved through the crop.
Yeah. So, like when I said, it all depends on what's on the menu. And people for years have always been telling, asking me, Young, how do you find crossbills in the Northeast? And again, so easily because I can usually go out and find crossbills in an area where they aren't that common here in the East. And it's again about what is on the diet or what is on the menu. So you kind of want to use that cone ripening phenology schedule to kind of go through your checkpoints. So yeah, all right, all right, it's the beginning of the cone cycle here, July, we'll say 8th, and you go, all right, I'm going to check the spruce crops. What are they doing this year? Are they good? Are they bad? If they're really good, crossbills are going to pack into those spruce crops because the food is very easy to access. It's a pliable scale compared to a lot of other like pines, particularly the hard pines. But if there is no spruce crop, getting to your question, yes, they're going to start to move to something else because they're all about, all right, what is the easiest thing I can forage on? So they're going through those checkpoints of, all right, no Engelmann spruce. Well, here at 5, is there anything going on with the blue spruce? We're going to check the blue spruce.
Mm,
All right, there's no blue spruce crop. All right, what's the Douglas fir crop doing? It's a little
mm,
easier to get the seed out of Douglas fir cone than it is a pine if it's a big. Um, but if all the softer cone conifers are kind of bust that year, they're going to try to be, they're going to try to figure out, all right, what pines, the harder pines, actually have a good cone crop. But
mhm,
they're going to use those other ones primarily first before they have to use the lodgepole, the ponderosa, for the most part. There
mhm.
are years, you might have, a fair cone crop of Engelmann spruce, but an incredible cone crop of ponderosa pine.
Mhm.
And, a year like that, you might have some breeders, type 2s up in the Engelmann, but you might also have them in the middle of the summer or late
Yeah.
summer, also in the Ponderosa. So it's, you get through your checkpoints. Hopefully that makes sense to people. It sounds complicated, but once you kind of go through it, all right, what are the softer cone conifers? Then what are, the kind of semi-soft or the middle ones? Douglas fir is then the next one after the spruces. Then
Mhm.
you're going to go to those hard pines, lodgepole, ponderosa, Jeffrey, um, limber pine's a white pine. White pines aren't a big player out west, although I sometimes get reports of type 2s hammering western white pine.
Mm.
Sometimes there's an area, and a buddy in Idaho that seems to get type 2s on western white pine, but it's not that common of a tree compared to what it is eastern white pine is. It's a pretty dominant tree here in the east. So
Yeah.
hopefully that, gives you an answer. There's no, when it comes to crossbills, the beauty of crossbills, there's no absolutes, in my opinion. It's a matter of thinking like a crossbill. That's what you have to do.
Think like a crossbill. Great.
A
And
crossbill. What am I
uh,
looking? What's the menu?
again, what is the name of the book?
Yes, it's the Stokes Guide to Finches of the United States and you can find it on Amazon. Google search. It's again, a lot of people are saying there's not a guide out there that's been put out that kind of covers natural history, ID, and also mixes in kind of these creative narratives that kind of give these birds some personality,
Mhm.
or insight to the personality of the bird. So it's an interesting read. We also kind of, sprinkle in the wellness aspects of bird watching throughout.
Excellent.
So it's been a lot of positive reviews, and we're very, very thankful.
Great. Well, thanks a
Yes.
lot, Matt.